To get us started, I had a great intro that was just done, but giving a sense of where I'm coming from. So I am director of engineering at Ramp right now. I went through different roles in my career, from being a student to being an intern to getting more responsibilities, up to having tech leadership roles for groups and organizations that were from the team size of about 7, 8 people to a full organization of about 150 people. And through that time, I was able to see a lot of different kind of leadership presented with different kind of experience, different kind of situations. And of course, through that time also, I had the opportunity to develop my own leadership style. And so today we're going to talk about how to be an awful leader and kind of follow a few easy steps to get the right rules in place so we can get to the right spot and do things in a way that's going to really kill morale, destroy people, and at the same time put yourself forward, which is basically what you want in your career. Some of you might be thinking right now about do I really want to be that kind of leader? Is that really what I strive to get to? And some of you might even think about Uncle Ben in Spider-Man that was saying with great power comes great responsibility. But let me tell you two things. The first one is that first, being a lead, that's not that much great power, just a bit. And secondly, well, Uncle Ben is not going to be there to see what we're becoming, so might as well advance our career in the process, you know? This is why we have to think in a different way, and we can come at it and be hey, if someone has to be the problem, why not it be me? And if you start getting into that mindset, you can start striving for better yourself. One of the things we're going to do in that talk is going over a few scenarios, a few situations or case studies that are situations that might or might not have happened. They've all happened. And kind of going through them, extracting the information about what it led to, what is the actual gist of that situation, and also what kind of advice we can get from this. So if you recognize yourself in this, that's great, you're already in the right path. If you don't, you have some progress to do, but I'm sure you're going to get there very soon. So let's get started with some of those scenarios, so that way we learn from the situations that others went through, and we can learn to repeat those way more effectively. So the first case study I want to talk about here is a situation where an engineering team working in infrastructure was developing a product that was set to replace entirely a big system receiving a ton of traffic, was handling things. And that team was trying to do the right thing by going step by step into deploying that new system. So they were moving bits and bits of the traffic, seeing how it goes, moving another bit of traffic, closely monitoring everything that's happening. And they were planning to stop at the end of that day with a 40% or so of the traffic going to that new system, and keep going on the next day or on the days after until they would reach 100%, while making sure that that new system was stable enough and structured enough that it wouldn't cause issues in their system. What happened next is that they got an executive joining their Slack channel, very upset about what are you doing? Why is that product not already available to 100% of our customers? The team tried to explain what they were trying to do, and the executive was no. If it's not done by morning, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to flip the switch myself. And so the team was very concerned about this, and a lot of people stayed around late at night, keeping going through the process of moving the traffic bit by bit, getting somewhere where it could be comfortable. And around 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m., they ended up having an issue with the system. It started breaking every request that was happening, so they rolled back everything, posted a message in the channel to say what was happening and they needed to regroup the next day. And in the morning, the executive came in there, looked at what was happening, and was OK, point taken, and left the channel. So what we can learn from this experience, looking at it first, is What happened there? Well, we have teams that ended up working harder. This is great. This is what everyone wants, making people work harder and get to the right spot. We got results faster. Anyway, people were wanting to wait until the next day to get the same results. Might as well get them the same night, so you kind of like move forward, you have the information faster, and you can keep moving to the next step. We have a team that wasn't that efficient in the first place. They were too careful, and so the executive pushed them to go over themselves. And in the end, in that process, the executive was able to showcase the positive impact that they had on the team. So, see, if you weren't seeing that in the story I was talking about, maybe you were missing the point. And so what we're learning from this is like, managing is not sufficient. We should be micromanaging. So the first thing is like, hey, if you delegate things, if you expect your team to do the right thing, you're probably doing it wrong. Like, in that case, the executive just came in and was like, hey, if you're not doing it, I'm going to press that switch, which is exactly what you would expect of someone in a leadership position, just coming in, not caring about your advice, and just pushing a button. Asking questions to everything people in your team do is great, because even if you don't have the details, it doesn't matter. Just your opinion is important. And as bonus, you can do like one of those 3 extra techniques of like asking them to screen share everything they're doing. If you're not available at different time zone, just ask them to record what you've been doing, what they've been doing, sorry. You can keep asking them about how that other project is doing. Extra bonus point in that case if you've been canceling that project already. And you can ask them to send you daily updates about everything that they've been doing by email, because who doesn't love sending emails? So that way you can get like a ton of emails in your mailbox that you decide to read or not. Anyway, you probably don't have time for that. So this is our first case study. Let's go to the next one. If you look at that image, you're going to see that there is like somewhat of a pattern here. There is actually like 3 different stories in there. The first one is an engineering team that was working in a certain way, and there is a new engineering lead that joined that team. And I wanted the team to be very synchronous on everything. So they decided to set up a daily meeting about everything, like a 15-minute daily meeting. The problem is that with a 15-minute daily meeting, most of the time you don't have enough time to go over all the details. And that lead wanted to know everything about every decision, actually understanding every line of code, even there was comments in there. The problem is like it was not sufficient either. So they were like, you know what, we need to plan what's going to happen in the next week. So they added like a 2-hour meeting weekly to plan for the week on top of the daily meetings that were happening. When people in the team were like, hey, I haven't made any progress because I'm waiting on that big deployment. Can we do async today so I can keep working on this? The engineering was like, no, let's just do a quick one today. Of course, the quick one was 30 minutes instead of 45. Another of those cases is when you are in a situation where people are planning for an event, whether it is like a specific meeting, ideally like a planning meeting, and they set up a pre-planning meeting to talk about that planning meeting. And then they're like, hey, we're not sure we're going to have the time in the pre-planning meeting to plan for things, so let's do a pre-planning meeting so we can plan the pre-planning so we can be more efficient for planning. One of the things that happened with that is that you ended up in a situation where many of the people going in those meetings were keeping talking about the same thing, and each meeting were like, hey, there seemed to be a need to talk more about this, let's postpone it to the next meeting. And then you had a next meeting that was talking about the same thing. And it was great because by the end of it, everybody knew the roadmap by heart. There was actually no roadmap, but at least the projects that people wanted to work on. And the last of this case is the idea of time box silence. So you get people in a room, but then if you're planning meetings the same way as the first 2 cases, people don't have time to read documents ahead. So what you can do is just put them in the room and reserve half the time of the meeting to read the document. And if they haven't had time to prepare anything, maybe to prepare these documents too. And what you get from this is like people that have more meeting time, but at least they prepare documents. And so what we're getting from those 3 situations is that we end up with very aligned managers or leads that know everything that the team is doing at any time. And since anyway they're all the time in meetings, they don't have the time to make any progress, so the knowledge you had from the previous week is still very accurate to this day. Everything that's pre-planning meetings for anything, that helps give a sense of purpose to people. So people feel busy, OK, that's not exactly the same as being useful, but it's almost as good. At least they feel they're doing something, or they have the impression of. You end up in a situation where you have very accurate and up-to-date documents, because everything that's been happening, everything that's being done, since they prepared the document at the beginning of the meeting, what kind of more fresh news can you have than the ones that have just been written? Anyway, if they were working on something, they would have had updates in them, so might as well just do that right now. And so there are some people that left some of those teams, right? But if you think about it, people that are unhappy with this, maybe they just weren't committed enough. So what we're getting from this is that we need more meetings, right? If you want your people to feel connected with each other, they need to have FaceTime. And if you want to make sure that they're actually doing their work, you need to be in meetings with them where they're actually solving problems. If you don't know what to do to have one more meeting, what you can do is actually schedule a meeting to talk about what meeting you could have. And you can even also think about, I need to schedule a meeting. Let's have a meeting to talk about when you're going to be available to schedule that other meeting. One other thing you can do also, remember that daily email we were talking about? What we can do from that is just you didn't have time to read it, so schedule a meeting so they can read it to you. I'm going to be efficient. And finally, don't use meetings to actually productive time. Just use them to write and read documents. That's what's efficient there. Another of our stories here is around an engineer that was hired for in a large company. Where things got crazy during the pandemic. You're probably aware, you probably lived through those situations where a bunch of companies that were heavily remote or offering internet services grew crazily during the pandemic. And a bunch of those companies hired a ton of people, and a ton of people joining at the same time weren't necessarily talking with each other. There are a bunch of teams that grew organically in each direction. And that engineer got hired to join that company to help fix the disconnect that there was between the teams. Some of the teams were entirely on fire, in the sense that they were so reactive to everything that they were on call all the time and doing nothing else. Some of those other teams were working on a project that another team was working on and that a third team already had worked on the year prior and decided not to do for reasons that were still accurate. And so that engineer decided to go around the table, talk with the different tech leads, the different managers, and figure out what can we do to kind of make people talk together and get them in the same place. And came with the idea that we could just make some sort of tech lead summit. Get everybody in the same room, get them to talk together, figure out a roadmap, figure out a plan, figure out a direction, and make sure that people know where they're going. And so when you're thinking about that kind of setup, that's something that potentially could work. And so they decided to go to their manager and be like, hey, you hired me for that job. Here's what we could be doing. And the manager looked at them and was like, yeah, but who's going to be on call during this time? If every tech lead is in that room, and since there is so much on-call work, who's going to be on call? I was like, well, there are other people in the teams. We can organize around it. And my manager was like, I've not been around the company for that long. I would prefer that things stay the same for now. And so that tech lead was very upset, went in the next one-on-one with the manager with, I think you're hiring me for a job, but you're not letting me do that job. What am I going to do? What's the next step? And the manager was like, nah, you just don't get the big picture. And basically, that's how that conversation ended. And so what happened in that situation is that if you don't have alignment in your team, you also don't have any misalignment. So if you don't want misalignment, just don't try to align things. No alignment, no misalignment. We are in a situation where if you want to foster creativity in your team, if you want to allow for personal growth, then allowing your team to reinvent the same product over and over might help that creativity. You probably all heard about that situation, the 4-hour coding loop, where basically you try to build a product. If it's not done in 4 hours, you kind of restart from scratch and you try to do it in under 4 hours. If you fail, you try again. That's basically the same thing, but with an extra level that everyone that's restarting that loop doesn't have the context of people that did it before. If you look at the turnover that was created in those teams, burning all the time and being on call all the time, this is actually a positive. You keep getting fresh ideas. You don't have to give raises to people. You keep getting new, fresh ideas. Nobody's burdened with context that they might have before. Well, OK, burnout might have been staying pretty high, but anyway, there was no way to evaluate moral with everyone going around and not having time for anything. So in a way, that kind of like balances out. And if you look at the final situation, that director, that was the manager of that engineer, ended up getting rewarded with more scope and more teams. So definitely was doing something right here. And so what we're learning from this is that famous sentence from Sun Tzu, which is, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. So what you want as a lead is more opportunities, so we need to create more chaos. Try and avoid people to be organized in any way. Change project priorities often, anyway, like change every day if you can. If everyone's confused, nobody's going to question what you're saying or doing. Avoid long-term planning, because if you have long-term planning, people can look at it and criticize it. If you don't have any plan, they cannot say anything. Scope creep, because if you do it, that shows that you're thinking big. Like, people are offering something, why not solving that bigger problem? You can get bonus points here if you make sure that different teams that don't talk together scope creep exactly on the same product and in the same direction, but don't talk to each other. And finally, burnout, well, I mean, that's a word, but if you look at it, that's just passion. It's just misinterpreted. Another thing we're learning from this also is about feedback. We can just ignore all feedback, because that's what happened in that situation, right? If people are giving you feedback, we all know that not all feedback is actually constructive, so in case of doubt, just ignore all of it. You don't need to get better anyway, you're the one in power. And see, if you're the one in power, you can just use authoritative arguments. We had an example here about you don't understand the big picture, but you can also use alternatives like it's not up for discussion, it's coming for leadership. In that case, if you're not even in a leadership position, but you might be talking to them or at a meeting set up with them, you can just say it's coming from leadership, always going to work. We already talked about it. Bonus point if you say that we was the person complaining about something and yourself, and they just don't remember it, and you don't want to have that same conversation over again. And we already made this decision. Here, that can be the royal we. Nobody needs to know. So the last bonus point here is if you're really struggling, you can also use the famous let's agree to disagree. Nobody's going to be able to say anything about this. Another of this case study is this one. An engineer was added on a project that was a fairly recent, fairly new project, and was supposed to kind of work on aligning this project with their team. And they looked at what was happening on the project and decided, this is actually going to cause a number of issues. We're going to have a problem with this. This is going to come back to bite us very soon. And so instead of staying in that situation, they tried talking with the team lead the lead that was leading the project, and getting them to realign direction to make something that makes sense. But the team lead was like, no, we're too far along. We're going to launch very soon. Let's not do that. And so they decided that it was too risky for their team, so they decided to try and escalate. They went to their manager and told the manager about the situation. And the manager was like, no, let it go. We're just not going to do this. Go do something else. Let them do whatever they want to do. A few months passed by, and the situation on that project ends up with a product that's not aligned with what the client wants, and that's causing exactly all the issues that the engineer was calling out. The engineer gets added back to this project to help putting things back on track, and they work on it, and they help getting to a better situation. Perf review time arrives, and the engineer gets the feedback that they failed to convince people to do the right thing for a few months, and basically got their perf review killed from this. And what was happening in there is that if you look at it, no matter what, the project launched in time. Well, OK, it wasn't successful, but it launched. Isn't that what's important on paper? Leadership avoided conflict. If you are in a conflict, there is a risk that you're going to lose it. So if you avoid conflict, you're never going to lose. Decisions were made without direct accountability, which made postmortems very refreshing because everything was very open-ended. Nobody was responsible of anything. Nobody did a bad choice. And the engineer learned that stepping back is good, but next time they should step back better. And in the end, the manager got promoted, which is another kind of the situations that, yeah, still a very well done job. And so what we're learning from this is that success is shared, but mistakes are delegated. Like, if things went well, it's probably thanks to you, thanks to your great leadership, and thanks to everything you put in place. You knew what was needed, and you pushed things forward, and you aligned things in the right way. Make sure that you go to your team and tell them how well you did, because probably that they won't tell you. But in parallel of that also, like, if there is an issue, you have different ways to kind of like delegate the blame. First, don't own to it. That's kind of like dangerous to do that. Tell your team that you're very disappointed, that they could have done better, that next time you're going to be overseeing the project more, even if you did, doesn't matter. Blame it on the intern. That's actually the best case anyway. They're going to be there only for a few months. You can just blame them. Tell them that they didn't live up to the hype. That's the best thing you can tell them. Potentially even write that in their report at the end. And in some cases, you can also use industry's best practice, like things were followed in the right direction. That was not your fault that industry's best practice didn't align. And you can also find someone else, ideally someone that was like trying to give you feedback at one point, constructive or not, doesn't matter. Just say it was their fault. Even if they weren't on the project, they probably should have been. And so we get to another of those case studies where we're talking about like a larger, bigger company that was generally product-led. So that company was in a situation where they wanted engineers to be very individuals in their approach. So when the engineers ended up seeing like a lot of requests from different customers, a lot of things coming from the sales team about like, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that third project, and everything was aligned at the same time, they started raising a flag to their leadership and going to like the product area and be like, yeah, we need to start having a prioritization of what we're going to do. What is the thing we're going to ship this year? Because nobody can work on all of these together. And leadership came back and was like, well, no, you know, like, we don't need to prioritize. Like, we try to do everything, and if we realize it's not working, we'll drop things later. And so the engineering team tried their best for this. There was like a lot of speed that was involved in trying to develop everything and every feature. And because there was a need for that much speed, nobody ended up like really talking together. Now, that's not that they didn't want to talk together. It's just like didn't have time for it. And so if you're in that situation, you end up with a bunch of features that are supposed to work together, but that don't. Because they were worked in parallel. You know that kind of concept on engineers on two sides building a bridge and trying to meet in the middle. That's basically what happened with like many different bridge and many middle in the place. We ended up with like features that didn't work together, things that were supposed to be set, but that were just like on the way we were writing it, more like these features are there, but when customers asked to use them, it was another story. But the thing in the end is that if you look at all of this, engineering had to work harder to make everything work together. They had to have more time spent with customers of the product to kind of have them adopt that new product and make it make sense. And so we got to the point where if we look at that situation, well, we still have many new features. Well, granted, they don't work together, but you still have many new features. So the customers were able to take those features, well, eventually use them somewhat, not necessarily fully, but they got what they were asking in the first place, which is a great success for the company. The engineers work cross-functionally under pressure, which is something that definitely fosters collaboration. They had to figure out a path for things to work. And each launch was declared a success for each of these products. One thing that's true is like there were a bunch of follow-ups. They got deprioritized in favor of new features. That happens, not your problem anymore. That's a question for tomorrow. And so what we're learning from this is that when you're asked to make a decision, try and be vague and indecisive. Push the decision to tomorrow if you can. Say we'll circle back on that until no one remembers what that was, or offer to take it offline and never bring it back. Stall until someone leaves. change roles or forgets they care, ideally try and chime in by scheduling meetings to talk back about this over someone's PTO that should be in those meetings. So that way you have to push the meeting because that person wasn't available. Delegate judgments to people that are not there. And if you have any doubt, just call things complicated and not worth blocking on for now. We'll circle back on that. Another thing we're learning from this is that you can overpromise and miscommunicate. You don't need your team to do things, right? All those customers that were asking things and the sales team that was saying, yeah, we're going to do it. You're going to have it next month. You don't need the teams to do that because anyway, if you rely on your teams, they always tell you they need more time. They don't want to work nights and weekends. I don't know why. So if you can just add promises, that's going to keep people on their toes. You always have time for that one more project because, yeah, it's going to be part of your planning. You're going to squeeze it in, no problem. Make sure that people don't have that much time to stick around and wait. They should be working all the time. If you're asked to kind of push deadlines, don't do it. Just say, oh, it's going to be done tomorrow. Don't provide another date. Don't try and push another week. And one bonus point here is if you can, regularly through the life of a project, just send a one-line, one-word email to your team very cryptically and let them scrambling to decipher your genius. Finally, the last case study for today is a situation where we had an engineer that was asked to kind of lead a very large project that involved many teams. And what they did is they took all the teams in the same room to align on what was needed to be done in the first place. They got everyone in the same place, got the concerns of everyone, tried to understand what were potentially all the timelines that were conflicting with that project, and aligning everything together. They worked on deploying a system that was actually critical for the company, that was migrating the whole traffic from a system A to a system B. And what happened in there is teams that were involved in the first place actually planned correctly for what needed to happen. So everybody knew what was happening and when it needed to happen, and they were able to structure things together and put things forward. And so we ended up in a situation where everybody was very happy with the project. They got to the end of that project, and there was a lot of praise that were shared about the team, about their collaboration, publicly, everywhere. And some of this praise were even used in promotion packets for some of the engineers that ended up getting a promotion from it. So what we're learning from that situation is that you could be leading like this. You could delegate, grow people. You could empower and recognize your team. You could take accountability for decisions you've made and even decisions that your team has made on your behalf. You could be shielding and enabling your team. You could be giving away the credit freely to the people that did something right. Well, you could, but where's the fun in that? Thank you very much.